All right. Well, Scott Cummer here with French Press Friday. I'm very excited this week. I've got two guests, Brian Lukkasson from Blake School and Reid Wixson from Minneapolis Southwest. And we're going to be talking about a consortium that the two of you have started. So I'm wondering if someone can, well, maybe first of all, thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate your time. And I'm wondering if we could just start out with somebody just summarizing this consortium and what it is.
Well, thanks for having us, Scott. So basically, the summary is there's a big hole in the repertoire. And we've all played a lot of transcriptions in the past. We have been playing a lot of contemporary BIPOC composers. But one of the biggest things that we're seeing in our classes is we love to get more historical perspective. I was working with a composer like 4 years ago, Anthony Green, who was a Black composer, and he was saying that it was very odd when someone would say, well, there's no like precedent or history to have a Black composer exist. And he said, well, hold up, wait a second. And he started naming all these composers, and I just started taking notes because I didn't know really any of them at that point. And so that got me really engaged. And I thought that, we've talked a lot about how it's important that all of our students see themselves in our curriculum, but not just in our curriculum, but also to see their historical perspective. So having researched a lot, primarily through IMSLP and through a lot of other websites, we found a lot of really interesting composers that have really fantastic stories that should be shared with a lot of people. And I think the biggest barrier that we're seeing is a lot of these composers wrote for full orchestra, or they wrote for just piano, or maybe just string quartet, not grade 3, grade 4 high school band and high school string orchestra ensembles. So that was the hole. And so we decided to find a composer a current composer that could arrange one of the piano works. So we chose Edmund Dede's Mephisto Masque, which was written 160 years ago. It's a really wonderful piece for piano. He also wrote an orchestra version, a full orchestra version. And Brian, you said Gunther Schuller did an arrangement too.
Yeah, Gunther Schuller arranged it as well. So we are using the piano version as like our main source material.
Okay. Yeah, when I was kind of thinking after I heard about this consortium, I'm like, I think that William Grant Still is the only like Black composer that we really talked about, and I would bet that that's probably most people's experience in college. So this is a unique consortium because it simultaneously raises awareness of a historically overlooked composer while also employing a BIPOC composer to write something new. So let's kind of talk a little bit, if we can, about who was Edmund Dede.
Sure, so I can talk a little bit about him. So he was born in, I wrote it down here, like 1827 from Louisiana. He self-identified as a Creole, but following really similar patterns to a number of other African-American composers and musicians and people of like maybe the upper echelon of society at that time, ended up moving to Paris, ended up marrying a woman from Paris. He was a clarinet player and did most of his studies and his work all took place in Paris at the time, where it was much safer for them to be. They were welcomed. They were still viewed a little bit as, like, he was viewed a little bit as a novelty, but for the most part, he was, successful and unknown here.
He spent 27 years as the principal conductor of an orchestra, theater orchestra. So, I mean, he was there for a long time.
Yeah. Does the bulk of his work, like, is it in piano? Is it, I know there's some opera, right? Is it run the gamut?
I think it sort of runs the gamut, like a lot of 19th century French composers, right? He was writing for the salon, and he was writing for the orchestra that he conducted. He was writing for himself. He was a fantastic violinist in his own right. So a lot of his music was incidental light music to accompany or to, prelude to the play, that kind of stuff. So, but a lot of piano stuff as well, and a lot of full orchestra. So,
yeah,
I think it was New Orleans Symphony played his Quasimodo Symphony in America, and that was like a huge resounding success in the latter half of the century. And that was one of his big breaks to become more well-known in America.
All right, I put that on my list to listen to, the Quasimodo Symphony. I'm intrigued. So Reid, why don't you answer this question? I don't know composer Lauren Brianna Ware, who's going to write this piece. How did she come to be selected for this consortium?
You know, at first, I think Brian and I both do a lot of just clicking down the rabbit hole of the internet and just searching composer websites over and over and over again using a lot of databases. I use the composer diversity one quite a bit, and I find myself clicking on people who write for band or for string orchestra, because I teach a band class. We teach band and orchestra. And her name popped up, and all of a sudden she was from Madison, which was my hometown. So I was like, oh, I'm going to learn more about her. And then I realized that my sister-in-law's mother was her piano professor. So she has some fantastic piano chops. And we knew that we were going to do a piano piece, right? So we wanted someone who really knew piano. And then Brianna's also written a couple pieces for band, including one for Scott Teeple and the University of Wisconsin band that's like phenomenal. And she's got a lot of string quartets in her catalog. So we were looking for a composer that had equal sort of footing in both worlds as the strings and wind band. So she made perfect sense. And as a pianist, it was amazing too. So.
And the moment we started talking to her about this project, she was all in, and we started talking about all these different pieces and composers. And, like you had mentioned, William Grant Still, like we instantly were past William Grant Still and talking about all these other people who, William Grant Still really stood on their shoulders. William Grant Still and Florence Price, those ones you know about, but, we're talking about Early and Ulysses Kay and Margaret Bonds. We went down that route for a while about the Margaret Bonds piece and George Walker, and she was just really into it. And like, there's just an instant connection for what this project needed to be and the void that existed there. And she was like, I think we left that conversation like, yep, this is it.
Yeah, she was distantly related to William Dawson too. That was really fun. Who's a phenomenal symphonic writer. So
I think we should just maybe talk a little bit about then how people get involved with this consortium. What's the financial obligation, and what do they get for it?
Sure. So the buy-in for this consortium is $250, and with that you would get a grade 3.5 wind band piece and a string orchestra piece, and they're two separate pieces. And you would get both of them. They'd be delivered at the beginning of the school year, and you would have performance rights running from basically January 1 through the next year, or that the premiere will take place in December.
That $250 for two pieces is a pretty stellar price for any consortium. So that alone should intrigue people.
That's always the struggle with these things, is you want to make sure that you are compensating the composer. You're making sure that you are paying a fair wage for the work that they're doing, but you want to be able to have as many people involved as possible. And so trying to gauge that whole thing, that's the price that we felt like was fair enough for people to be able to commit to it. And then also it is a fair price so that we can pay Miss Ware a fair wage for that. And there also is an option, I should say, that if like the $250 in this fiscal year is tough because people have spent so much money on flex band arrangements or whatever this year, they can split that up between this year and next year to be able to make it work for their school program.
And then we also have schools that don't have orchestra, so we have a $150 option for the band only. And if for schools or organizations that just are interested in the string version, same $150. So I think there's like 3 or 4 of those scenarios happening right now. So
okay, that's great. So if I remember right, didn't Lauren suggest, like, if you kind of get to a point of above and beyond, that the money is actually going to be given to I forget what it is exactly. What's the plan with the money after you pay her?
Well, the plan with the money is if we reach our threshold for which we've agreed for her contract, then the money would be donated to an organization that she would suggest, and we would kind of decide as a consortium team And we're excited that we are at that threshold now. So anybody who is joining now is going to be able to have that money go towards a donation. And like just today, we've been texting back and forth about what that organization will be. So I don't think we're ready yet to announce where that's at, but we're really excited that she is just kind of taking the driver's seat on this and finding some organizations that are really personal to her and that we think are going to have a strong, lasting impact.
We were kind of overwhelmed, Brian and I, a couple of days ago because we reached that threshold as of 6 full days of searching for consortium members, and it took 6 days to get 35 organizations to join us. And so it's just been really overwhelmingly positive in response and supportive. And so we're super excited that now we can pay it forward to a really great organization. What that is, we're not sure yet, but we're working on it right now. Actually, literally today and tomorrow, I think we'll probably make some choices. So
that's fantastic. I mean, that's such a great idea. This also seems like something that's gonna have potential to go beyond just this one consortium. Do you guys have plans for continuing this after this year?
Yes, absolutely. That's kind of our plan from the start, is that we saw this huge void in the repertoire, and we were like, what would this look like if we did 5 of these or we did 10 of these? So this is definitely now that we can see the success and the interest in this, that we are already kind of talking about, okay, what's our next step? What sort of pieces are going to be? What sort of time frame are we on? How can we get even more people involved? So yeah, this is something that we want to fill the void and get new pieces, new historical pieces, but then also get other composers involved with this as well.
All right, so how do people get involved then? What's the step?
There's a super simple Google form. The link will be somewhere down there, I guess.
Down below.
The link will be down below, as they say. And you just have to fill out our music. Actually, our performing arts boosters are being the financial agent. So over at Southwest. So we found out we can take PayPal. I found that out. I didn't know that we accepted PayPal. We accept credit cards and we accept handwritten checks. So those are the 3 things. So you just sign in the form and either Brian or I will send you an invoice with the W-9 and all that kind of stuff. So
that's awesome. Sounds really easy.
We do have a deadline of the 1st of April.
Yep. So one more month, essentially, to gather more supporters. So, but like we said, every supporter now is paying it forward at this point, which is so cool. And so
it's so cool. Like when I heard about that, I'm like, how does this thing get any better? It's such a, I just commend the 2 of you for putting this together, and you clearly found the right composer. I'm going to try to include some links in the description too to some of Lauren's music, because I spent some time listening to it today and it's fantastic. Mm-hmm. It's unique and fantastic. And I'm really glad to be exposed to her as a composer. And then the other thing I wanted to just let everyone know, since I mostly have a Minnesota following, but this isn't just a Minnesota thing. This is whoever wants to be involved in. That's correct?
That's great. We've got high schools in Texas, in California. We've got universities in Tacoma, Washington, over to West Virginia. A lot of our big local universities and colleges have signed on as well, but it's pretty neat to have it be nationwide.
Yeah. Well, great job, guys. Nice follow through with a great idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought that it would be a good time then to talk a little bit deeper about why is it important to provide our students with diverse exposure of composers instead of just the ones that we're used to. What is diversifying that what does it do for our kids?
You want to go first, Brian?
Well, I think that's a large question. Yeah, I'll start with this one. But the focus that Reid and I have had, and there's been a number of other people, and I used to be at Spring Lake Park High School and worked co-taught with Nora Tykas, who's been heavily involved with a lot of this stuff as well. But the whole idea is that we wanted our students to be able to see themselves in the music that we were playing, but also for them to see the world around them. So for see students that look like them and students that don't look like them reflected in the music, so that they can kind of have that identity with what we're doing, so they can see themselves to be successful, so they can see people that are doing a different career path, and they can see as many options as possible. I think someone told me once, like, if you can see it, you can be it. And so we need to put forth those examples for students to be able to see. So that's kind of where everything started for us here. It just, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago that I realized in one of our programs at Spring Lake Park that I had, both me and Nora had programmed an entire concert of all white men and had probably done it for years. And I just had this realization when looking out at my students on the stage, and I was like, well, that is not who's out there. So like, I'm doing a huge disservice to these students. And I was just doing the music that I knew. I mean, that's all that we do when we first come out of college, is we just have this repertoire that we were taught, that we played in high school, we played in college, and our teachers who played that taught us. So we come out with this like very, the canon that we know is a very white male-centric canon. Like, that is just what exists out there. And so it's hard to break out of that kind of rut, because it is a rut, and to be able to find other works that are just as good, if not even better, to be able to get at our musical objectives, but then also our objectives for our students.
Yeah, I think, the concept of mirrors and windows is a concept that Brian got me hooked on 5, 6 years ago, or guess. It's really been since the Black Lives Matter started. Really, that was the turning point for our conversations, I would say. And just the idea of mirrors and windows, where kids should be able to see themselves in the curriculum, but also to see, into another culture, another background. And then that got me really wanting to teach more about the story of the composer and the story of the genesis of the piece a lot more. And when you start doing that, kids become a lot more invested. And so when you're teaching the story of the composer, that elevates the piece for them. It gives them a lot more intrinsic motivation. And like, we know that a lot of our kids are not going on to becoming professional musicians. We're trying to like show them where music is in our country, and where music is in our culture and in context. And by presenting the notes and the rhythms in a concert and doing that on repeat for however many concerts a year, and then 17 years later, we're still kind of in that cycle. Talking about the story of a piece and the story of the composer just was a lot more engaging as a teacher, I found. Yeah. And all of a sudden, kids are buying in way more. And of course, doing it for all composers, right? Because we want to make sure that all those voices and all those stories are being told, just uplifting, and then shining a light on the ones that haven't been told. That's obviously been so pivotal. I mean, in our school at Southwest, we're a very politically active school. There's a lot of sit-ins when major events happen, and it's tough to know how to respond as a teacher in sort of decolonizing our curriculum. And what that really means is decenter the whiteness out of our band folders and the orchestra folders. It's looking at that folder and saying like, oh, yeah, okay. So just, starting fresh, getting some new pieces. I mean, I looked in our library, and I think there was like 780 titles, maybe 10 were by women. The only pieces of a composer of color in our library were pieces that I had purchased. And it's only through that economics of that we can start to make some changes. So
yeah.
And this is not like a new idea either. Like, if we look at our colleagues that are in social studies, or our colleagues that are in language arts, like, they have been doing this for a decade, where they're looking at the literature that they're teaching and trying to find BIPOC composers and different narratives that have been missing, and including that and replacing the different books that way. So this is not like that, progressive as a thing that we're doing. It just took a long time for it to get to music and to classical music, and for us to be able to really evaluate what we have and be comfortable, I guess, letting go of that.
Yeah. I think that, like, honesty in this conversation is really important. I know that from what I've seen you guys, speak about with this, you agree. And so, like, my moment started with my representation of female composers. And it started because I like to put pictures of the composers up on a wall. I got boom, boom, boom. And one day I looked at the wall and I was like all men, right?
Yeah, a lot of beards. Right.
And so that was the beginning for me. And I still feel like I'm very early on my journey to like making myself better and making our programming better. But it was doing that was very helpful to me. It was a very graphic, like, boy, I could see what I was doing, and I knew that one year wasn't just a mistake. It was a good representation of what I was doing every year. And then I became very like, how do I get more female composers? And so I started doing the research. um what's interesting, maybe for teachers like me too, is that um we're very white in rural Minnesota. And so it became an issue for me, because I was like, this is my opportunity to expose my students to a lot of different backgrounds, that the only way they're going to get this exposure is if I represent it in my programming. So it's not even like, there's a part of it that's about letting students see themselves represented, but there's also part of it that's about letting students see other people represented, right?
I think what's so different about the English teacher versus the band director is not only are we educating our students, but we're educating our communities with our concerts. And it's a very public, not that English teachers' work isn't public, but I think that has been one of the barriers for why a lot of band directors haven't crossed this line yet, right? And so it's educating the public, everyone who comes to our concerts, what is music education. So.
Yeah. And I think part of this conversation is also about music that shouldn't be taught in our schools. And this is, I don't know how far in this we want to get into, but there's certainly a catalog of music it's from the minstrel era. It is maybe has lyrics, in its history that are inappropriate. And one of the things that I think we should allow our colleagues to do is mourn a little bit for that, because like there's some music. I'm going to use the tune of "Oh Susanna," for example. I've always loved that. I actually grew up on playing that on harmonica. That was like one of the first things I learned. And then I found out recently, like, oh, it's got a really bad background. I shouldn't play that anymore. And I was honestly a little bit sad about that, because it's kind of, in a way, a part of my history. So we have to allow, like, our predecessor, sorry, we have to allow our colleagues to kind of mourn the loss of that music, but then find new outlets. So hopefully you can follow my track here, is like, how can I find new things to replace those things that we need to take out of our curriculum?
Well, I think you hit it in there. Is the first thing you have to just educate yourself. Like, you should know what is going into all the pieces of music that you are programming for your students. Where does it come from? What is the background? If it has lyrics, what are the lyrics? And you really ask yourself, like, are you okay with explaining this to a student? Sometimes, like, oh, well, it's got lyrics, but we're a band, so we're just going to play it, so we don't really have to talk about that. But you do have to talk about, because that is the whole piece of music. You want to talk about composer's intent. You want to talk about what the time period that is happening, and what is that doing to the people that existed around this piece at that time. So I think the first thing is just doing your research. If it's a piece that is about a particular like culture, or is using sounds from a different culture, like looking at that appropriation and evaluating it. I was in a session at MMEA just last week, 2 weeks ago. Rudy Peralt at UMD was talking about appropriation, and he said something that I thought was really profound. Is he was talking about it as just this intersection of cultures, and you have to stop and study that intersection. We can't just dismiss it and say, like, oh, that's appropriation, so I'm not going to do it, or it's okay, I'm going to do it. You have to stop. You have to study that, and you have to teach students how to study that and how to understand it, how to unpack that, because they're going to run into that appropriation throughout their life. And so someone has to stop and teach them how to deal with that. And what better place than in music, where we have this community that we build, where we have trust, we have these relationships. Like, it's a safe place. It should be a safe place. And so it should be a place that we can be able to talk about that. So I think that's the first thing, is just making sure that we are really educated about that. The second thing about replacing things is trickier. I mean, just because it's a part of your history it doesn't mean that it should be part of your student's history. Like the pieces that I grew up playing, I love them. Doesn't mean that my students are going to love them. I think that's a mistake that a lot of directors make, is they're like, I love this. This is why I became a band director, right? But we don't want all our kids to be band directors, right? Like we live that life, it works for us, but it's not, we don't wish it on everybody. And so like they need to find their own spark and their own piece, and we're all unique. So I think that's the first thing we need to just think about as directors, is like the music that we are feeding our students. Why are we feeding it to them? Is it really good for their musical soul, or was it really good for our musical soul and we want them to have our experience? And something that Nora Tycast has done a lot of work in is taking some of those older pieces like that canon, those pieces that we really hold on to, that are still deemed acceptable, that that we are comfortable with the stories, the composers and the writing and everything. And then how do we pair that with something different? How do we pair that with something that is more representational? The example she likes to always give is, maybe looking at Korean folk songs by John Marchant and the way that he uses different sounds to depict Asian culture, Asian sounds at that time, and pairing it with this piece like Chen Yi's Spring Festival, by a Chinese composer, and looking at how she is doing that. So we can really use that intersection of culture to stop and study it. So I think when there are those pieces that you still want to be doing, but you want to branch out, then pair it with something else. And that elevates both pieces then. I think that's probably the best way to kind of handle some of those situations. And then there are just things that we just need to not play. And that's okay. And we can be sad about it, but we just need to move on.
Yeah, I mean, recently it was made known to me, after having programmed it probably 3 times in the last 17 years, that Lass's trombone is actually super racist, right? And it was like, and I had never thought about that. And I mean, I think the last time I did it was like 4 years ago, right? And all of a sudden it was like, oh man, that was so fun for the trombone section. I was going to do that one like every 5 years, right? And it's like, okay, well, are there other pieces that are fun for the trombones? Of course, someone else wrote another piece for the trombone section, okay? So we just have to dig a little bit deeper, right? And, James Reese Europe, who's a Black composer from the military band tradition. I think it was the Navy band, maybe Air Force band.
Army? Like
Army
the
band.
Hellfighters.
Hellfighters. Yeah. So,
fantastic story.
Yeah, but he's got a couple awesome marches. Guess what? They have great trombone parts too. No. But I think, finding some of those pieces and just chucking them, right? You just got to chuck stuff. And I think one of the harder parts is for the method book stuff, right? Because you get through the method book, especially in orchestra, book 1, book 2, book 3 of Essential Strings, they're full of Stephen Foster tunes that, you just have to say, we're not going to play that one anymore. And then instead of just moving on, you can tell your students why. And it's okay to tell the students why. I mean, they deserve to understand why we're not going to play Oh Susanna. It's in book 3 on like page 18 of the Essential Strings book, right? We just didn't play it, and we talked about why, and so move on.
Yeah, I like that honest conversation with kids too, because that's part of how we develop their ability to understand this stuff and how to maneuver through it too. Not just glossing over it, but this is why we're not doing it.
Oh, because
I also like to dig deep. Well, I was going to say, I also like the dig deeper idea, because to me, it's an exciting challenge. I'm using Lauren's music as a great example. If you guys hadn't done the work, I never would have listened to Lauren's music. And I was having a great time today, digging a little bit deeper in a catalog of somebody that I would not have listened to otherwise. So that challenge to find something else, as people that love music, that should be a very engaging thing, right? Like, let's dig deeper and find some stuff that exists that's probably better for some reason. And it certainly brings out the representation issue.
And I think when you talk about researching music, I mean, Reid and I both love researching music and will waste hours doing that and finding composers and going down weird rabbit holes. But I think like having a good starting place of where to go is really key. Reid talked about the composer diversity database. That's a fantastic place to be able to start from. But I mean, how many people just go to Pepper as their first place to start? Like, I mean, that is not a place that has representation at the forefront of their business model. And so why should we go there? You know, they're all their editors' choices or whatever. And so if thinking about even how you start your search, you should go to a place that is going to get the means that you want. Because if you go to Pepper for the music, then you're going to get what Pepper has, which is not diversity, or it's, you know, very, very narrow in its scope.
My colleague over at South High School, Sophia Butler, she just finished up a project which translated super well to distance learning. It was, we just earned a grant for $500. Let's buy some music for our class. And you can't use Pepper. That was the rule. You can't use Hal Leonard, right? And she gave them the databases, and she taught her students how to search the databases. And it was like a real project, right? They really did get like $500 from a grant, right? So it really worked. And now they're buying the music and they're going to play it next year. And why not include the students in on this? Because we're modeling that curiosity, and we're modeling that behavior of being much more reflective about the pieces that we play. And it's not just the notes and the rhythms, or it's not just that one fun song that we are hearing. It's way deeper than that.
Yeah. So what are some good starting points for directors then? You've mentioned the composer diversity database, which I know I've used. Are there any other really good tools out there for us?
I really like And We Were Heard, which is an organization that actually has been helping to promote the consortium. But what they do is, first off, they have a fantastic resource page. I think it's my favorite resource page out there. So maybe I can give that to you. You can put that in the notes also. But what they do is they pair up underrepresented composers with ensembles, high school ensembles, college ensembles, to get quality recordings of their pieces, because they're not going through publishers, they're all self-publishing. And you can just browse their webpage and find a number of just like really great pieces, all different grade levels from like 0.5 to grade 5, with good recordings that they made. And it's a great way to be able to give that money directly to the composers, because I think Reid mentioned it earlier, like, you know, that's when you start purchasing money from underrepresented composers, then like now you're voting with your money. And that's where there's going to be change in our industry. That's where it's going to move Pepper to change the way that they promote music, or the way that they hire people or whatever, that we need to pay with our pocketbooks and be able to, or vote with our pocketbooks.
Yeah, and I have nothing against Hal Leonard. I had a wonderful conversation with Mike Sweeney at what was the Eckroth band director workshop a couple summers ago. And, I asked him, I'm just straight up asked him at this point. It's like, what is the process to get something published? And, he's one of like literally 3 or 4 people that are the gatekeepers, right? He gets he said something like 10,000 scores in his inbox a year, right? It's just, the industry is just not set up to move forward and branch out with new composers. It's set up for status quo. And, they've done a great job at making money, and they've done, they have their thing. And that when you get a Mike Sweeney piece, what it's going to sound like, he's a great writer and a super great arranger. But it's just not set up to open and up to more voices. And that's why, with the internet, you've seen way more composers recently doing self-publishing. Yeah. And think like 5 years ago, it was like kind of sketchy to get something on a PDF file. Like, I don't know if I really want to print it. Could you just send me printed copies? Now, can you even imagine asking someone to send you a printed copy now? Like, of course not. Like, my Google Drive is just full of PDFs that we've bought now, right? You just don't buy printed music in the way. And once composers turned that corner of, it's okay if someone's going to print an extra flute part, right? That was the corner they all turned, which at the time seemed like a big hurdle. Like, oh my gosh, what if we lose the suspended cymbal part? Like, whatever, like just print another one now, right? It's no big deal. But 5 years ago, that was not the case. What did you say?
The timpani part.
Oh yeah, it's always the timpani part or the suspended.
They put like one timpani part in the music, is so it's like, of course you're going to lose that one. Like,
yeah.
I think
right, so
that's the publishers. That's the publishers that care about that. It's really not the composers. I mean, I think for me, a big turning point was realizing how much the publishers were controlling what we were playing in our bands, and they were controlling it all, and that they weren't letting the composers in. And I mean, even if you look to something like Midwest, we look to Midwest as this like, oh, this is this amazing educational experience. It's run by the publishers. Like that's what it's there. It's to make money for them. They've started to kind of change their model a little bit, but we've had this industry and this profession that is built around the publishers for decades. So it's hard to like tear down that system.
Yeah, and I think like the ownership has to come back to us though as educators, because we were the ones paying for that stuff. And so of course they're going to keep on providing it like that. I was once told that, you know, if you looked at like some of the #1 sales for J.W. Pepper, it would make you pretty sad as an educator about what the top selling stuff is. And so we can, like you said, vote with our money is by spending it on things that will make the publishers change their direction. If I can, I didn't prep you guys for this, so I apologize if I put you on the spot too much here, but can you give me some composers right now, like recommendations? Who should I be listening to and maybe even looking at purchasing some music from? How about Reid? I'm going to start with you. I'll put you on the hot spot first here.
Reid, just do it that way. What's in your folder?
What's in the folder right now?
Yeah.
Oh man, look at that. Boom. He's got it.
Oh. Have you watched the video of that?
Yeah, you told me, Brian. You told me. Yeah, well, Kate Nishimura is in the folder. We've got Solemn Prayer, which came out of the Minnesota Band Directors Consortium over the summer. That was there. We got Sharp 9 from Omar Thomas. I was really excited to do Mother of a Revolution this year, but then the pandemic hit and we'd already bought it. So we'll just, we'll do it another year. But Omar Thomas would be the top voice right now. Not that every high school band is going to do Our New Day Begun, but certainly a lot of his music is very, very challenging. For the orchestra side, if I am, in my dream world, Jesse Montgomery is like my favorite composer to listen to right now for strings. But we also have William Grant still in our folder. We've got Mother and Child right now in the folder. So those just a couple.
What about you, Brian?
Let's see. We're also doing Sharp 9 by Omar Thomas. Omar is amazing. And I also am sad that I couldn't do Mother of a Revolution this year. We have a piece by a woman named Matia Williams called Spring. There's a flex version of that available on Murphy Press. Gio Santos, he's a great composer that I've done a number of his pieces in. He wrote a couple of flex pieces as well. In orchestra, we're doing, we have a Bach piece, and then we're doing a piece by Rena Ismail, and Reid's got a Bach piece probably too.
Yeah, we got a Bach piece right here. Prelude and Fugue.
There you go. So I mean, like that's the thing. Like I think there's a lot of people who think like, okay, well you're not playing the dead white guys. Like no, like they're still there. I think we've just diversified and we've updated the curriculum that's going on.
Yeah,
so, I think going back to orchestra, Chevalier de Saint Georges is fantastic. He wrote 2 symphonies that are super accessible to high school string orchestras. The wind parts are essentially just doubling. It's like whenever it's forte, like he throws a pair of oboes on or whatever. So no offense to the wind players in that, but it's okay to perform it at strings alone. Those 2 symphonies, the Kevin Day, going back to the concert band stuff, Kevin Day's got some really great stuff, especially in that grade 2, grade 3 range. That we were excited to do. Kalasha Dunton, that piece Stillwater is, that piece is so beautiful. Like, so. But Brian mentioned Murphy music. Yeah. Murphy, it feels like Murphy is kind of the new home for the self-publishing composers. It feels like a lot of composers have found access there that certainly they won't get at J.W. Pepper because of whatever finance and economics that I don't fully understand how things work on that side of the door. But Murphy has an incredible catalog of
Yeah, that's one of the first places I'd probably go. I was going to add into your list Jody Blackshaw, especially because she's got a lot of stuff that's successful for middle school bands, and she also does a lot with composition and allowing students to make some choices in their music, which I think is something that we're always trying to meet those targets. We have a hard time figuring out how to do that, and she has just written tons of music that allows for that, and also just like really great scores and study material for the director so that how to go about teaching this to students and being successful. So Jody's got just some fantastic stuff. She's an Australian composer. So you could pair her with Granger if you want.
I might have to follow up with some, because I scribbled down as many of those as I could. So I'll have to see. And I'd like to have these in the description below this video so that people have some places they can start. Also down in this description below, people will find the MMEA Equality Task Force. Reid, you shared that with me. And it's, if I remember right, it's like 10 points of like starting to pick repertoire selection. And Brian, you're in it with Nora Tykast and a bunch of other people, just giving some real clear starting points so that this idea doesn't feel overwhelming, because it can feel like I can't do the stuff I'm used to doing. And that's not the message either. It's like you can do it, but why don't you pair it with something new? And we'll have a link to an NPR story on I believe it was your students, wasn't it, Brian?
Yeah.
The NPR, yep. And then a band in Minnesota podcast with Nora and Brian. You guys, is there anything you want to close with here before we sign off?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is reach out if you have questions. One thing that Reid and I had benefited from, and I had benefited from for my years teaching with Nora, is to have a colleague to be able to talk about these things with, to be able to bounce some ideas off, but also to practice some of these really tough conversations that are about race or that are about the repertoire. That's why I felt like I'm more comfortable talking with students about it, because I first tried these conversations out with other adults, other teachers. Be like, hey, can I talk to you about this? This is a piece that we're going to do. I'm not quite sure how to introduce this, so can we just talk about it? And we all need to have those colleagues, and it can be a really isolated profession, especially if we're the only people in our building that are teaching our subject area. So reach out to friends, to colleagues. You can reach out to me. I'm sure Reid would welcome also, and we can help you with some of those conversations. Just like, here, why don't you think about it this way? Or, let's meet on Zoom and talk about that. But I think it's really important that we really use the whole community to be able to help everybody get better.
Yeah, I commend you guys, because I think that it's what we need to see. Like, you've helped me both in this conversation we've had today, but also in just the things I've seen from you guys over the last year in particular. It's motivated me and given me new ideas. So I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, I would just add, this is the conversation in every profession, and we need to step up in our profession. Every single element of our society has kind of paused and examined itself. And this is the way that we've chosen to do that for our profession. So,
all right. Thank you guys. I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Appreciate your support.